I don't wanna die. I sometimes wish I'd never been born at all.
Angelina Jordan, a voice that defied nature itself. The Norwegian prodigy who, at just 8 years old, silenced an entire nation with a rendition so hauntingly mature it seemed impossible for a child to possess. With her bare feet planted on stages across the world and a tone borrowed from jazz legends who lived and died before she was born, she became the youngest artist to ever captivate millions with the soul of someone who had lived 100 lifetimes. Her voice, raw and aching with emotion, turned her into a global phenomenon before she could even understand what fame truly meant. For over a decade, she has been called a miracle, an old soul, a gift from the heavens. But behind the standing ovations and viral performances lies a story not of fairy tales, but of silent suffering, a childhood stolen, a body pushed beyond its limits, and a loneliness so profound that even the roar of applause could not fill the void. The world has celebrated her genius for years, but few are prepared to face the devastating truth she now carries. Before we begin, if her voice ever moved you to tears or gave you hope when you needed it most, leave a like as a tribute to a girl who gave the world her soul before she even knew how to protect it. Born on January 10, 2006, in Oslo, Norway, Angelina Jordan Astar entered a world that seemed ordinary on the surface. Her mother, Sarah Astar, a gentle soul with dreams of her own, and her father, Jerry Slatman, a man whose presence would soon fade into absence. But it was not the absence of her father that would scar her most deeply. It was what she saw in the eyes of a stranger that would change everything. At just 6 years old, during a family trip to the Middle East, little Angelina encountered a barefoot girl her own age on the cold, unforgiving streets. The girl had no shoes, no shelter, no voice to cry for help. Their eyes met, and in that single moment, Angelina saw something that would haunt her forever. The girl's feet were cracked and bleeding, her clothes torn and filthy, her face hollow with a hunger that went beyond food. It was the hunger for hope, for safety, for a childhood that had been stolen before it could even begin. From that day forward, Angelina made a silent vow. She would never perform with shoes on. Every stage, every competition, every television appearance, she would stand barefoot as a living reminder of the girl she could not save, the girl whose face she could not forget. It was not a publicity stunt. It was not a quirky trademark. It was a wound that never healed, a promise etched into her very soul. Years later, when asked why she never wore shoes, she would say with tears in her eyes, "I sing for her. For the girl who had nothing, for the girl I left behind." That moment did not just shape her performances, it shattered her childhood. While other children played carelessly, Angelina carried the weight of the world's suffering on her tiny shoulders. While other children dreamed of toys and games, she dreamed of saving every broken soul she had ever seen. Her family, well-meaning but struggling themselves, could not shield her from the darkness she had witnessed. Her mother, Sarah, did her best to nurture Angelina's extraordinary gift, recognizing early on that her daughter possessed something beyond explanation. But even Sarah could not erase the images that haunted Angelina's mind. The girl on the street, the poverty, the cruelty of a world that allowed children to suffer. At home, Angelina would sit by the window for hours, staring out into the Norwegian twilight, silent and unreachable. She began to retreat into music, not as an escape, but as a way to scream without making a sound. Her grandmother, Mary Zamani, an Iranian woman with a love for jazz, introduced her to the voices of Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and Nina Simone. These were women who had suffered, who had loved and lost, who had poured their pain into every note, and somehow, impossibly, 8-year-old Angelina understood them. She did not just mimic their sound, she embodied their sorrow. In 2014, her mother entered her into Norway's Got Talent, hoping that performing might give her daughter a sense of purpose, a reason to smile again. But when Angelina stepped onto that stage, barefoot and fragile, and opened her mouth to sing Gloomy Sunday, the song known as the Hungarian suicide song, the entire nation froze. judges sat in stunned silence. The audience forgot to breathe. This was not a child singing. This was a voice carrying the grief of lifetimes, the ache of souls long departed. One judge, visibly shaken, whispered, "How is this possible? She is 8 years old." Another could only shake his head, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. Angelina won the competition, but the victory felt hollow. The applause was deafening, but inside, she was still that little girl on a dusty street haunted by the face she could not save. Armed with a voice too old for her body and a heart too heavy for her age, Angelina Jordan stepped into the international spotlight, and the world was not ready for what it witnessed. After her stunning victory on Norway's Got Talent in 2014, she was no longer just a child. She was a phenomenon, a mystery wrapped in melody, an impossibility that demanded explanation. Her performances went viral, spreading across continents like wildfire. Millions watched in disbelief as this barefoot 8-year-old channeled the spirits of jazz legends who had been dead for decades. She sang "Summertime," and people swore they heard Billie Holiday whispering through her. She performed "Fly Me to the Moon." And suddenly, the ghost of Ella Fitzgerald seemed to possess her small frame. It was not talent, it was something beyond comprehension. But while the world marveled, Angelina was slowly disappearing. The pressure was suffocating. Record labels circled like vultures, each one promising stardom, riches, and global domination. Television producers demanded more performances, more interviews, more of her soul. Her calendar filled with appearances in country after country. Norway, Sweden, the United States, Japan, the Middle East. She was flown from stage to stage, city to city, time zone to time zone, her small body running on adrenaline and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, if she sang loud enough, she could drown out the pain. But fame is not a bandage. It is a spotlight that makes every wound more visible. At just 9 years old, Angelina began experiencing her first breakdowns. After performances, she would collapse backstage, her legs trembling, her breath shallow, her eyes vacant. Her mother would find her curled up in dressing rooms, crying silently, whispering, "I'm so tired, Mama, I'm so tired." But the machine of fame does not stop for exhaustion. The contracts were signed, the shows were booked. The world wanted more, and so she gave more, even as pieces of herself crumbled away. She performed at the Nobel Peace Prize concert in 2014, standing before world leaders and dignitaries, her voice filling the hall with a rendition of "What a Wonderful World" that left grown men weeping. But she did not feel wonderful. She felt hollow, empty, used. Her body began to rebel. Chronic fatigue set in, a bone-deep exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Her immune system weakened and she fell sick repeatedly, missing weeks of school, losing precious moments of childhood she would never get back. Doctors warned her mother that Angelina was burning out, that her nervous system was under constant stress, that she was on a dangerous path. But how do you tell a child that the gift that makes her special is also the thing that is destroying her? How do you ask her to stop when the entire world is begging her to continue? At 11, she was invited to perform on America's Got Talent, the biggest stage in the world. It should have been a triumph. Instead, it became another weight on her fragile shoulders. She sang Bohemian Rhapsody, and Simon Cowell himself sat speechless, his critical tongue silenced by the sheer impossibility of what he was hearing. Heidi Klum cried openly. The audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. But backstage, Angelina sat alone, staring at her bare feet, thinking once again of the girl she had left behind. The girl who would never stand on a stage. The girl who would never be celebrated. The girl who was probably dead by now. And that thought, that unbearable guilt, became her constant companion. No matter how many people cheered, no matter how many awards she won, she could not shake the feeling that she had abandoned someone who needed her, that she was living a life of privilege built on the suffering of others, that every note she sang was a reminder of her failure to save a child just like her. The applause felt like mockery. The fame felt like betrayal. The world saw a star. Angelina saw a fraud. By 13, she was no longer performing out of joy. She was performing out of obligation, out of fear that if she stopped, she would lose her only purpose. Her only way to honor the girl with no shoes. Her only way to make sense of the pain. But the cracks were growing wider. Her smile in interviews became rehearsed, mechanical. Her eyes, once bright with wonder, grew distant and haunted. She was a ghost in her own life, performing the role of Angelina Jordan while the real girl withered somewhere deep inside, unreachable and alone. The world saw her as a prodigy, but behind closed doors, Angelina Jordan was a child drowning in expectations she never asked for. Every stage became a battlefield, every performance a war against the voice in her head that whispered, "You are not enough, you will never be enough." At 14, her anxiety spiraled into something darker. Panic attacks became frequent, striking without warning. In the middle of rehearsals, her chest would tighten, her vision would blur, and the air would refuse to enter her lungs. She would gasp like a drowning person, clutching her throat, terrified she was dying. Her mother would hold her, rocking her gently, whispering reassurances that everything would be okay. But how could it be okay when the very thing that made Angelina special was also the thing that was suffocating her? Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. Nightmares plagued her. In her dreams, she was back on that street in the Middle East, searching desperately for the barefoot girl, calling out her name even though she never learned it. Sometimes she found her, but the girl's face was twisted in accusation, her eyes hollow and dead, whispering, "You left me. You forgot me." Angelina would wake up sobbing, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She began to dread sleep as much as she dreaded waking. There was no escape, no rest, no peace. Her teenage years, which should have been filled with friendships, first loves, and carefree laughter, were instead consumed by isolation. While her peers attended parties and football games, Angelina was locked in recording studios, perfecting takes that were already flawless, chasing an impossible standard of perfection that existed only in her mind. While other girls worried about grades and crushes, Angelina worried about whether her voice would crack on the next high note, whether she was disappointing the millions who believed in her, whether she was dishonoring the memory of a girl whose name she never knew. She had no real friends. How could she? No one understood what it was like to carry the weight of the world at 15. No one understood the crushing guilt of surviving when so many others suffered. Her relationship with her family grew strained. Her mother, Sarah, torn between protecting her daughter and supporting her dreams, began to feel like a villain in Angelina's story. Every time Sarah suggested they slow down, take a break, prioritize Angelina's health, it felt like betrayal to Angelina. "You don't understand," she would scream through tears. "I have to keep singing. If I stop, then what was it all for? What did I take off my shoes for?" Her younger sister, Juliet, watched helplessly as Angelina slipped further away, becoming a stranger in their own home. Family dinners were silent and tense. Laughter felt forbidden. The house that had once been filled with music was now haunted by unspoken pain. At 16, Angelina made her most controversial decision. She announced she would be competing on America's Got Talent, The Champions, despite warnings from doctors that her body and mind were on the brink of collapse. Her mother begged her to reconsider. Therapists urged her to take time off. But Angelina was convinced that if she could just win, if she could just prove herself on the biggest stage one more time, then maybe the guilt would ease. Maybe the girl with no shoes would forgive her. She flew to Los Angeles, her body weakened by months of poor sleep and barely eating, her mind a storm of anxiety and obsession. She performed Million Miles, a song about longing and distance, and her voice shattered hearts across the globe. But the performance that the world saw as transcendent was, for Angelina, a desperate cry for help disguised as art. She did not win the competition, and the loss devastated her in ways that no one could have predicted. It was not about the trophy or the title. It was about validation. It was about needing the world to tell her that her suffering had meaning, that her sacrifice had been worth it. When the judges chose someone else, it felt like confirmation of every cruel thought she had ever had about herself. You are not good enough. You wasted your childhood for nothing. The girl with no shoes died for nothing. She flew back to Norway in silence, staring out the airplane window, wondering if it would be easier to just disappear. The months that followed were the darkest of her life. She withdrew completely, shutting out her family, her fans, and the few people who still tried to reach her. She stopped posting on social media, stopped performing, stopped singing altogether. For the first time in her life, Angelina Jordan was silent, and the silence was deafening. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she had quit music forever. Others whispered about a breakdown, a hospitalization, a complete collapse. The truth was worse than any rumor. Angelina was not gone. She was simply lost, wandering through her own mind like a ghost, trying to remember who she was before the world told her who she had to be. Her body, pushed beyond its limits for so many years, finally gave out. Chronic fatigue syndrome was the official diagnosis, but it felt like something deeper, something doctors could not name. She spent weeks in bed, too exhausted to move, too numb to cry. Her voice, the one thing that had always been there, began to fade. Not from illness, but from neglect. She stopped practicing, stopped vocalizing, stopped caring. If the world did not want her voice, then why should she force it? Her mother would sit beside her bed, holding her hand, begging her to eat, to speak, to come back. But Angelina was unreachable, trapped in a prison of her own making. At just 17, Angelina Jordan had already lived a lifetime of pain. The prodigy who had once captivated millions was now a hollow shell, broken by the very gift that had made her extraordinary. And yet, in the rubble of her collapse, a quiet truth began to emerge. The girl she had spent her entire life trying to honor, the barefoot child on the dusty street, would not have wanted this, would not have wanted Angelina to destroy herself in the name of guilt. Slowly, painfully, Angelina began to understand that survival is not betrayal, that living is not forgetting, that perhaps the greatest way to honor that girl was not to suffer endlessly, but to heal, to find peace, and to sing not from a place of guilt, but from a place of love. In 2024, at 18, Angelina Jordan began the slow, agonizing process of rebuilding herself. Not as the prodigy the world wanted, but as the young woman she needed to become. She started therapy, real therapy, where she could finally speak the words she had buried for so long. She grieved the childhood she lost. She confronted the guilt that had poisoned her for over a decade. She learned for the first time that it was okay to rest, that it was okay to say no, that her worth was not measured by how much she could give until she had nothing left. Her voice returned, but differently, softer, more fragile, but also more honest. She began singing again, not for the world, but for herself. Small performances, intimate settings, no cameras, no contracts, no pressure. Just her bare feet, and the music that had once been her prison, but was now becoming her sanctuary. She sang for the girl with no shoes, yes, but she also sang for herself. For the child who had been forced to grow up too fast. For the teenager who had carried burdens no one should carry. For the young woman who was learning, slowly, painfully, to forgive herself. At 19, Angelina Jordan stands not as the untouchable prodigy the world once worshipped, but as a survivor. Her voice, still hauntingly beautiful, now carries a different kind of weight. Not the weight of guilt, but the weight of wisdom. She has learned that healing is not linear, that some days are harder than others, that the scars of childhood trauma do not disappear, but they can be lived with. She still performs barefoot, but now it is not just a tribute to a girl she could not save. It is a reminder to herself that vulnerability is not weakness, that standing exposed, without armor, without pretense, is the bravest thing any of us can do. Her relationship with her family is slowly mending. Her mother, who never stopped fighting for her, is now her greatest ally. Her sister, Juliet, has become her closest confidant, the one person who sees Angelina not as a voice, but as a human being. They laugh together now, something that once seemed impossible. They talk about silly things, normal things, things that have nothing to do with music or fame or suffering. And in those moments, Angelina feels something she thought she had lost forever. She feels young. Her body, though still fragile, is stronger than it has been in years. She has learned to listen to it, to rest when it asks for rest, to move when it craves movement. She no longer punishes herself with impossible schedules and relentless expectations. She walks along the fjords of Norway, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth, and she breathes. Just breathes, and sometimes that is enough. Her career has shifted. She no longer chases viral moments or record-breaking performances. She creates music on her own terms, releasing songs when she feels ready, not when the industry demands it. Her latest work is raw and deeply personal, filled with lyrics about pain, survival, and the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up. Critics call it her most mature work yet. Angelina calls it the first time she has ever been truly honest. She has also become an advocate, using her platform to speak about child exploitation in the entertainment industry, about the mental health toll of early fame, about the ways the world consumes young talent without caring about the human cost. She has partnered with organizations that fight child poverty, that provide shoes and education and hope to children who have nothing. She cannot save them all. She knows that now. But she can help. And helping, she has learned, is enough. Still, the shadows linger. There are nights when the panic returns, when her chest tightens and her breath refuses to come. There are days when she looks in the mirror and sees not a survivor, but a fraud. There are moments when the voice in her head whispers the old lies. You are not enough. You will never be enough. But now, she has tools to fight back. She has people who love her. She has a life beyond the stage. And most importantly, she has herself. The girl she spent so many years abandoning is finally being welcomed home. At 19, Angelina Jordan is not the untouchable legend the world tried to make her. She is beautifully, messily, bravely human. She is a young woman learning to navigate adulthood with scars that will never fully fade, but also with a strength that cannot be broken. She is a voice that once carried the grief of the world, now learning to carry her own joy. She is proof that survival is not about erasing pain, but about learning to live with it, to grow around it, to let it shape you without letting it define you. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson Angelina Jordan has to teach us. That genius is not worth the cost of a childhood. That talent, no matter how extraordinary, should never come at the expense of a life. That the world has no right to demand so much from someone so young and then act surprised when they break. We celebrate prodigies, but we do not protect them. We consume their gifts, but we do not care for their souls. Angelina Jordan is not just a cautionary tale. She is a mirror reflecting back to us the cruelty of our obsession with perfection, with early success, with squeezing every drop of magic out of a person before they even understand what magic costs. Her story is not over. She is only 19. She has decades ahead of her. Decades to create, to heal, to become whoever she chooses to be. But if her journey ends today, it will still have been worth telling. Because in her survival, there is hope. Hope that even the most broken among us can find a way forward. Hope that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal. Hope that a voice silenced by pain can one day sing again, not for the world, but for itself. And now, dear friend, her story turns to you. What lesson will you take from Angelina's journey? To protect the children in your life from the weight of adult expectations. To value people for who they are, not what they can produce. To remember that behind every extraordinary talent is a fragile human heart that deserves kindness, patience, and grace. Remember, Angelina is not a perfect person. She has struggled, stumbled, and been scarred in ways that will never fully heal. But perhaps that is what makes her journey worth reflecting on. It reminds us that greatness is not about flawless performances, but about the courage to keep living even when everything inside you wants to give up. To love yourself despite failure. to keep singing even when your voice cracks. Share your reflections below. Subscribe for more stories of the human soul behind the legend, and join us in honoring not only the talent, but the fragile, beautiful humanity inside those we too often forget are just people, just like us. For in every scar, in every shadow, Angelina Jordan shows us the ultimate truth, that the greatest legacy is not perfection, but the courage to be imperfectly, bravely, defiantly alive.